The global capital would be in Jerusalem, and I think that satanically speaking, they want that city as the capital because it is considered the world's most holy city. It's a holy city to Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike, and it's where they want their Antichrist to be seated. In fact, in the Bible in 2 Thessalonians says that the beast will seat himself there in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God, and so that's what they're after.
Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in. I am so thrilled to have on the line best-selling author James Perloff. His books include The Case Against Darwin, The Shadows of Power, and his latest book, Truth is a Lonely Warrior, Unmasking the Forces Behind Global Destruction. And guys, I have to tell you, this is the book to buy. Get this book right now. It is the answer for your friends, family, colleagues, those who don't understand, or those who are in the process of waking up. This book has it all, and we're going to go through some of it right here and right now. James, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on the SGT report, and I appreciated your explaining what SGT stood for before we started.
Yeah, it's just my initials, and but SGT report is the corporate propaganda antidote, and truth tellers like you, James, boy, are we lucky to have you on our side. Guys, I love this man. He's a true defender of humanity and the truth about humanity and its origins. That Tornado in a Junkyard book is also a must-read. But Truth is a Lonely Warrior. Guys, in the interest of giving credit where credit is due, I really try hard to do that. A lot of YouTubers don't. If you want to learn more about this book in detail, there's a multi-part interview about this book that James is doing with Jay Taylor. That's Jay Taylor Media on YouTube. And they're going through the book 2 chapters at a time. And this book deserves that much time spent. We won't get that deep today, but we're going to cover a lot of the chapters that really struck me as must-reads. James, those of us who are awake and informed read the news, quote unquote, very differently than those who aren't, don't we?
Right. Well, we know that false flags have been used to implement changes. Obviously, they're being used for gun control here in America. They're used to encourage a police state. Certainly, we saw that in France after the Paris incident, which had all the classic, false flag marks to it, IDs being dropped, the obvious shouting of Allahu Akbar, and just the classic trademarks of a false flag event. They are looking to amplify the conflict that's already been created by this refugee crisis. It seems like Europe is on a course headed for destruction, which the New World Order people would be very happy to see.
Yeah, and we've been saying for a very long time now that Gladio-style terror attacks are clearly back in play. Dozens killed after massive bomb explosions ripped through Belgium airport, subway, and then the headline soon changed to ISIS claims responsibility for Brussels terror attack that killed over 38. And again, what do you make of the date? 322, Skull and Bones. Does that ring any bells?
Yeah, that is the date that symbolizes Skull and Bones, and we've seen the uses of these dates before. I imagine some of your viewers are familiar with some of the Hollywood symbology around numbers and the predictions of 9/11, for example, in Back to the Future. If people look that up on YouTube, there's quite a bit there. I have posted this in my article on Flight 11, which was a flight that carried Muhammad Atta allegedly and struck the first tower. But I've got a picture there. I'm not the one who discovered this. It was another researcher. But right behind Muhammad Atta on that flight was a former Israeli commando named Daniel Lewin, at least according to the official flight manifest. And prior to 9/11, Daniel Lewin had a portrait taken in front of panels that looked just like the Twin Towers. And he's wearing a watch called a hijacker watch. It was a Swatch watch hijacker model. And the minute hand, hour hand, and second hand are all on the 11, and the date is set to the 11th. Of course, he was on Flight 11 on 9/11. The picture was not taken on the 11th, but he had the date sent to the 11. And as a high-tech executive, of course, he was smart enough to know how to set a watch. So there's all kinds of numerology that's involved with these people. I'm a little concerned, actually, Sean, about next year being the year 2017, because it's going to be the 100th anniversary of our entry into World War I, the 100th anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, which created the first communist state, and the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, which ultimately generated the state of Israel, which has been responsible for so much of the terror we see around the world. Even though the mainstream says it's the Muslims, we know that there's a great deal of Zionist involvement here, and that Israel is pushing now for what they call Greater Israel. So, yeah, there's a lot of numerology going on, and I would not be surprised at all if 322 was picked for a numerological reason.
Well, I'd never heard that about that particular hijacker. I knew there was an Israeli special forces agent, I think, on that plane. But I'd love it if you'd send me that picture. I've never seen that picture, but it doesn't surprise me. And, getting back to this Belgium bombings attack, again, I just interviewed F. William Engdahl, who explained to us in detail how ISIS, or IS, is a creation of the CIA and Israeli Mossad. So if ISIS claimed responsibility for the Belgium bombings, what does that tell us? And again, those of us who are awake and informed read, quote unquote, the news differently. We interpret it differently than the sheeple people who aren't awake. And if ISIS has claimed responsibility for these Belgium bombings, then it's really this New World Order apparatus coming right out and saying, hey, we did it. Our guys did it. Our operatives did it. And I don't think that this type of murder, this type of false flag terror is going to end until this New World Order is either brought to its knees or gets what it wants, James.
You're right, and ISIS is a creation of the West. That's been confirmed by Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, the former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and Ron Paul's talked about it in his weekly report. We created ISIS, and the first big hint on this was when it was 2013 when Obama wanted to attack Assad after the alleged sarin gas attack, and one of a long, long string of false flags, and we could take those false flags going back to the sinking of the Maine and even earlier if we wanted to. But when the American people said, no, we're sick and tired of Middle East wars, what did he do? 1 year later, he came back and said, well, now we have to attack the very guys we were supporting last year, which, of course, was ISIS, the very people who we were supporting against Assad. So it is a creation of the West. And so we have to bear that strongly in mind whenever we hear about ISIS attacking, whether it's in Paris or Belgium or in San Bernardino.
Yeah, as it pertains to the Paris attacks, it just needs to be said that the top suspect, I don't even know how to pronounce his name, Salah Abdel Salem, this top quote-unquote suspect was, of course, captured Minority Report style just the other day. And again, it's just more of the same because, again, we know what happened in that Paris nightclub, according to the lead singer of the Eagles of Death Metal, Jesse Hughes, is that he admitted the entire event seemed staged to him with all sorts of security anomalies before he went on stage, and then he completely retracted his story just 48 hours or so, and I suppose that was because the powers that be got to him and said, don't you dare. And I guess what it really speaks to, James, and what you get to the heart of in your book here is this satanic control structure. I mean, I hate to go right down the rabbit hole so deep right off the bat because we could talk about the chapters in your book, Chapter 2, The Powers That Be, Rockefeller CFR, Chapter 3, The Devil as a Banker, Chapter 4, How the Cartel Has Run America, but I want to jump right out to Chapter 10 and get to the heart of the matter, and it's Satan's control structure. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, in America, part of that control structure is the Council on Foreign Relations, and that was the book that I wrote that actually sold 100,000 copies, and it's The Shadows of Power, which I wrote in 1988, so almost 30 years ago. It's about the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations. If we look at this New World Order oligarchy, the CFR is basically their American foreign policy branch, but because they contribute so many cabinet members to presidential administrations, they might be considered the chief controllers of domestic policy as well. But they were set up in 1921 after the bankers failed to get us into the League of Nations, which they generated at the 1919 Paris Peace Conference. The Senate refused to ratify the treaty, and so they figured they had to do something to get America into world government. And so they created the Council on Foreign Relations with Carroll Quigley in his opus, Tragedy and Hope, called it a front group for J.P. Morgan and Company. And you can just look at the personnel, that's true. The founding chairman was Russell Leffingwell, who was a partner in J.P. Morgan and Company. And the founding president was John W. Davis, who was J.P. Morgan's personal attorney. And of course, the Rockefellers came in, and David Rockefeller was a longtime chairman, still is the honorary chairman. But what they do is they provide the cabinet level personnel for Washington. As I was saying, in fact, let me just give you some numbers on that. Since the council was founded, we've had 19 secretaries of state drawn out of the council, 21 treasury secretaries, 23 defense secretaries, which also includes what they used to call the War Department, and 16 CIA directors. And if you look who's there right now in Obama's administration, you've got John Kerry, CFR, at Secretary of State, and Jacob Lew at Treasury, CFR, Ashton Carter at Defense, CFR, Jay Johnson at Homeland Security, CFR, and all their predecessors, immediate predecessors at that position under Obama were also CFR. So that's their group for controlling policy. And if you go back to the Bush administration, of course, Cheney was CFR, and Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice and Paul Wolfowitz and the rest. So it doesn't matter. That's one of the reasons why it doesn't matter whether you have a Republican or Democrat in the White House, and why there's just these cosmetic changes when we shift from one party to the other in control, because it's the same Wall Street globalist elitist organization, the Council on Foreign Relations, is dominating the cabinet. So that's, in America, that's that part of the control structure, but it's international in scope. And so other authors have written books that describe elements of that. Daniel Estlin has an excellent book on the Bilderbergers, and because it's not just important to these people to control American policy, they want to coordinate it internationally. So venues like the Bilderbergers, which began in 1954. And by the way, David Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger were at the 1957 Bilderberger meeting. Can you believe that? And they're still around today, giving out advice. These guys seem to have a lot of longevity. But there's also, of course, the Trilateral Commission, which is a big new Brzezinski who's still around, helped David Rockefeller found in 1973. That's another venue to get together. Another is the Committee of 300, which former MI6 officer John Coleman talks about in his book, The Committee of 300. And of course, he's got a website as well, John Coleman, with a lot of books and white papers on it. Of course, I've got the Bohemian Grove, which I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with, the sort of satanic or semi-satanic annual get-together in California, where they have a sacrifice, mock sacrifice, they say, but some think it's a real sacrifice in front of a 40-foot owl, very occult, very satanic. So they have all kinds of structures, and that really goes back to the Illuminati, which took over Freemasonry at the time of the French Revolution, and they were being directly financed by the Rothschilds at that time with the same goals, the destruction of national sovereignty in favor of a world government back then in the 1800s. So this is a long-term plan with many, many facets to it, and we can't focus on any just one of them. It's part of a big picture, which is one reason why I wanted to write this book. Because one thing I've found, Sean, is that if you only talk about one aspect, like the council, or you just talk about 9/11, people don't get it. They think, well, our government would never attack us. They said the same thing about Pearl Harbor. There were a lot of truthers regarding Pearl Harbor, including our Pacific Fleet commander, husband Kimmel, who said that we knew about it. Not meaning him. I mean, he was denied the information. But Washington withheld that information, their foreknowledge of the attack from him. And people said our government wouldn't do that to us. So you need the whole picture, and that's why I wanted to write this book, to give people the history of false flags, but also who really runs the government, and what its international implications are, and who controls the media, because it's due to media control, that mainstream media control, that we don't find out about this.
Yeah, and guys, the reason I said this book is the must-buy book is because it's all here, right? Chapter 7, The Media and the Nature of Truth and Lies. Chapter 8, The Destruction of Nations. Chapter 13, Zionism. Chapter 14, 9/11. Chapter 17, The War on Faith. Chapter 18, The Most Hidden Book. Chapter 22, Arrival of the Despot. And it's all here. The big picture is here. So let's just talk a little bit about the Satanic Pyramid, because at the end of the day, the wake up that really happens when you go down the rabbit hole and you learn about all of this information, and you learn about the Illuminati and the secret societies and the CFR and the Trilateral Commission and Kissinger and Rockefeller and Rothschild, at the end of the day, what you realize, and it's what Bill Hicks said, James, have you ever noticed how the demons seem to run amok while the good men die young? It's so true. These guys are demons incarnate on earth, and I think it's because at the end of the day, at the very tippy top of the pyramid, the entity that they worship is Satan, and it needs to be said. I know that there are many listeners that are atheists and don't want to hear this information, but at the end of the day, the biblical truth is that Satan is real, and these people worship Satan, don't they?
That's right, and that has been affirmed by Ted Gunderson, the late Ted Gunderson, who was his last job in the FBI was a special agent in charge of their LA office with 700 FBI personnel under him. He's confirmed that, and it's also been confirmed by another man I referenced earlier, John Coleman, who was an officer in MI6, which is the British CIA. It was confirmed back in the 1950s by William Guy Carr in his book Pawns in the Game. That was one of his books. He wrote several. He was in Canadian intelligence. So many people who have worked in our intelligence services who have come out to tell the truth have affirmed that they are Satanists, and Bohemian Grove affirms that. And just to connect the Bible to this whole structure, the Bible talks, of course, in the book of Revelation, which has caught so many people's attention, and I believe has been greatly misinterpreted to throw us off by some of the modern theologians. But it talks, of course, about the beast or antichrist who will rule the whole world, and no one will be able to buy or sell without his mark. And don't we see this coming true when we see happening, Sean? We have a world government shaping up, and we see it in the EU, which came out of the common market, and they're trying the very same thing here. They're trying to turn NAFTA into a North American Union, and we see the Council of Foreign Relations Journal of Foreign Affairs calling for a North American Union. They've been doing so for some time and have not succeeded because American patriots have opposed it. But all of these are just stepping stones towards world government. You know, Zbigniew Brzezinski, of course, famously said we cannot leap into world government in one quick step. What we need is progressive regionalization, because people will accept a regional government, that you'll accept an association with your neighbors before you'll jump all the way into a world government. But the Antichrist, to govern the world, he'd have to have a world government. And so the point simply is that this world government is taking place, and yes, it is satanic. Whether we like to refer to spiritual things or not, it is satanic, as evidenced by the behavior of the leaders of this world government themselves.
Yeah, very well said. And let's talk about Zionism. You're right here in chapter 13. The Rothschilds have long been the establishment's dominant financial power. They have supported three major goals: world government, League of Nations and the United Nations; revolution, funding Lenin and Trotsky; and Zionism, the movement to establish the modern state of Israel. Why the last? Figure 11 is a Perloff family picture from around 1900. You go on to say that your paternal ancestors were Russian Jews. And you go on to say people who criticize Zionism, as I'm about to do, are frequently accused of being motivated by anti-Semitism. Since I'm half Jewish myself, I hope it's clear that such feelings do not impel me. And lest this book be quoted out of context, let me state that I am unequivocally opposed to racism in any form. James, as am I. So let's just briefly talk about the nature of Zionism, because I think it is behind a lot of what we see happening in our own government, in this endless support of Israel by all of the people in our government.
That's right. And I think it probably was 9/11 that first tipped me off. You know, I was kind of behind the curve. I was writing for the New American Magazine back starting in 1985, which is it's a publication of the John Birch Society, and it was a book that they were distributing called None Dare Call It Conspiracy that first woke me up to things like the CFR and the Fed. But they never touched on Zionism. They did not want the anti-Semitic label. And so it was some years before I started to figure out that Zionism was a very big part of this. And from the Rothschild perspective, and I've seen evidence now, the internet has been a wonderful thing for us in the alternative media to rapidly learning information. They were actually already buying land in Palestine in 1829, and they already had this targeted. What their goal actually is to create not only a world government, but every government has a capital. Ours is in Washington, and their world government, it's the global capital would be in Jerusalem. And I think that satanically speaking, they want that city as the capital because it is considered the world's most holy city. It's a holy city to Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike, and it's where they want their Antichrist to be seated. In fact, in the Bible in 2 Thessalonians says that the beast will seat himself there in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. And so that's what they're after. And their goal is also to create a greater Israel. And it is very true to say that the primary motivation of the Arab Spring and these many wars. I'm sure you've seen that clip of General Wesley Clark saying that in 2001 he heard at the Pentagon we were going to make wars on 7 countries, including Iraq and Libya and Syria. And sure, oil's a big part of it, but an even bigger part of it from the perspective of the Zionists to control our government through AIPAC and other means from behind the scenes is we're getting rid of Israel's enemies one by one, Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi. And I believe that they actually plan to have Assad meet the same fate as Gaddafi and have his body dragged through the streets. But Putin put his foot down and said, no, I can't derail their plans, at least for a while. But Zionism is a big part of this. And again, it was 9/11 when I started reading the truth about that, and I saw that Dov Zakheim was the comptroller of the Pentagon when that famous 2.3 trillion went missing, according to Donald Rumsfeld, the defense secretary. And I've heard other people, I believe Susan Lindauer, the CIA whistleblower, said it was actually closer to 9 trillion. But then you've got Lucky Larry Silverstein, Zionist, buying the World Trade Centers. What was it, 6 weeks before it happened, for 124 million, and gets he and his partners get a $4.5 billion payout in insurance. And then you've got Michael Chertoff in charge of the Justice Department's investigation, also a Zionist. And his brother or cousin Ben Chertoff did the article in Popular Mechanics that alleged to debunk 9/11 truth. And of course, this Michael Chertoff who let the dancing Israelis go free. And the media didn't even mention that they were Israelis. They said there were some guys dancing that got arrested. They never mentioned the Israeli part here in America, at least. And we mentioned, we were talking earlier about Daniel Lewin, the Israeli commando on Flight 11. You've got airport security at Logan Airport run by Israel. You've got Zim Navigational, which was an Israeli company that had been in the Twin Towers, I believe, for the full term, the 30 years or so. And then 1 week before 9/11, they pulled out and went to another building. And you've got, of course, was it Odigo, the instant messaging service, alerting Israelis not to be in the World Trade Center, and Philip Zelikow heading the 9/11 Commission, and Richard Pearl, who spied for Israel and never went to jail for it, was Bush's, he was on Bush's Defense Policy Board, Paul Wolfowitz. The list of Zionists just goes on. And so you can definitely see that the main beneficiary, when you're a detective and a crime has been committed, one of the first questions you ask, if you don't know who did it, is who benefited from this crime. And obviously, we did not benefit from 9/11. We suffered destruction. We've suffered the Patriot Act, infringement on our freedoms, the cost of trillions of dollars of war, and the Muslims didn't benefit. Look at all the wars that have been made upon them and the chaos that the Middle East is in now, which is driving refugees into Europe. The only real beneficiary has been Israel. And when you see all these Israelis and Zionists connected to the event, there's no denying the power of Zionism. But it goes way back. It goes back to this. I follow Hollywood a lot, and but I should stop here. I've said some things that may want to. You may have some comments to.
Oh no, I want to hear what you're saying. What you're going to say about Hollywood. But I mean, I'll just jump in and say you're absolutely right about who benefited on 9/11. Larry Silverstein certainly is at the top of the list, and he got payouts from the collapse of those buildings, for which he insured them against acts of terror just 3 months before 9/11, and was paid out billions of dollars for the collapse of 1, 2, and of course 7, which is never broadcast by the media, nor is it reported about. And most of our friends, neighbors, and colleagues don't know anything about World Trade Center 7, which collapsed at near free fall speed at about 5:25 on 9/11. And of course, the BBC reported early about the demise of that building, which is an impossibility unless they knew it was going to be brought down, unless the powers that be knew it was going to be brought down and brought down by explosives, which it was. But of course, NIST says there is no evidence that explosives were used because they didn't look for evidence of explosives. And all the evidence was shipped off to China just as quickly as they could make it happen. And I think 9/11 is at the crux, my friend. I mean, if the American people can't wake up to the false flag event that was 9/11, then the American people will never wake up. But I think there is signs that the American people are waking up to the fact that something is wrong. Because what else would explain all of this fervor and support for Bernie Sanders and Trump, who are both, to some degree, anti-establishment? Now, some of the people in the comments will disagree with that thesis, but to some degree, they're anti-establishment because the establishment hates Trump. See, now I'm off on a tangent, but just circling back to where we were with this nature of Zionism, It just strikes me that the Rothschilds, you say that they started to buy up land in Palestine in the 1800s. The Rothschilds have used the Jews and Israel as their proxy state. I mean, I've always said, James, that the Rothschilds are the only private family on the face of the planet that own nuclear weapons, and they own those weapons through their proxy, Israel. And as they roll out the Satanic Beast system, this very, very complex, multi-decade, multi-century plan is now coming into view, and it strikes me, it leaves me with the impression that it's satanic in its brilliance and its scope, because who would have had the patience and the strategic fortitude to be able to play this thing out as they've done for so very long, unless it is literally satanic in its brilliance?
Well, you're absolutely right. If it was just if people were solely motivated by selfishness and money, then it would just last their lifetime. But you can see that the plan has been developed over decades, in fact, even centuries, which tells you that since men's lifetimes do not span that long, that this is a battle that is ultimately spiritual. And but the material rewards are given to people in order to induce obedience and cooperation with the plan.
Yeah, and why don't you remind us, what were you going to say about Hollywood? You keep an eye on Hollywood, and you're going to tell us a little story.
Oh, well, just one of the mysteries that got cleared up for me was when I was a teenager. But back in the '60s, my father and I were watching television, and the station announcer said, "Tonight we'll be showing the winner of the Academy Award for the best movie of 1947, Gentleman's Agreement." And my father and I said, "Oh, the best picture of the year. That must be a magnificent film," because we were used to movies like Lawrence of Arabia, Doctor Zhivago, Bridge over the River Kwai, David Lean classics, And we thought, "Oh, this is going to be a great movie." We watched it. It was the most boring movie. It was just a sermon on anti-Semitism, and okay, maybe it had a good purpose to it, but it was terrible. It was lousy dialogue and no romance and just a lifeless film. And we said, how did this dog of a movie ever get an Academy Award as Best Picture? Well, looking back at it, now I know why. It got the Academy Award in March of 1948. And 2 months later, Harry Truman made us the first country to recognize Israel. What the movie was doing was softening public opinion for the acceptance of Israel as a nation. That was, and of course, that the Zionists run Hollywood. And that's just one of many examples that could be given. Of course, another famous one is the release of the movie Pearl Harbor in May of 2001, which was just a few months after PNAC had called for a new Pearl Harbor to create a greater military presence in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. And just short months before 9/11, our Pearl Harbor actually happened. And I look back in Touchstone's pictures, which made Pearl Harbor. I've seen no evidence that they ever made a patriotic movie before. Why in the world did they suddenly get a gumption up to make a movie about Pearl Harbor in the year 2001? It really didn't really make any sense. But these things... when you understand the underpinnings and the motives behind the New World Order, what's happening usually does make sense.
Yeah, and the media, Hollywood, the news media, the Mockingbird mainstream media is a weapon. It is a tool in their arsenal that they are using against the people. And we're going to talk about that chapter in your book, Chapter 7, The Media and the Nature of Truth and Lies, here in a second. But I just want to close out this 9/11 discussion by reading this very important passage from page 195 of your book. And it's this: "And the purpose of 9/11, at least two are evident. Number one, to create the National Homeland Security Agency as a big brother apparatus that will incrementally spy on and oppress the American people based on ever-widening definitions of the word terrorist. As discussed in Chapter 6, the agency was proposed before 9/11, according to Ted Gunderson, when the 1993 government arranged initial bombing of the World Trade Center building. Of course, guys, that is a fact. It was the government, the FBI, who handled the patsy that tried to bomb the World Trade Center. They gave him the bomb. They cooked the bomb, and he didn't even want the bomb to go off. It went off, and then he recorded the calls, which proves the FBI was behind that initial bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993. But after the bombing of the World Trade Center failed to bring about the desired anti-terrorist legislation, they upgraded to Oklahoma City. Also a false flag. You guys should see the bombing reports of what was going on the day. The story changed the day after, but there were reports of additional bombs in the buildings in Oklahoma City the day that happened. And, of course, additional perpetrators were being sought, not just Timothy McVeigh. I go on here. When that failed to produce Homeland Security, they resorted to 9/11. The second reason for 9/11 was to generate the Middle East wars sought by Paul Wolfowitz, Feith, Pearl, and Israel. This leads to another question. Why did we go to war in Iraq? You guys, this book is just so incredible and so gripping, and if you don't buy it and give it to your family, you're really missing out on an opportunity to wake up people. It is a very, very important book. Now, before we lose you, James, let's talk about Chapter 7, The Media and the Nature of Truth and Lies. This is a very important chapter because, as I just mentioned, the Mockingbird mainstream media is being used against the people. It's a tool. It's a weapon being used against the American people and people around the planet because, as we began this conversation talking about the CFR and the foundation of the CFR and the members in the CFR, so many of these highly paid Mockingbird mainstream media journalists are CFR members, aren't they?
Well, that's correct. And we could actually name some of them. For example, if you go over to Fox News, the chairman and CEO, Roger Ailes, is CFR. And if you go to Time Warner, which owns CNN, Jeffrey Buick is the president of Time Warner, CFR, and a lot of their journalists like Judy Woodruff and Paul Lozano have been CFR. And but you go down whether you're talking about Time Magazine, the old Time Magazine founded by Henry Luce of the CFR, CBS, which is founded by William Paley of the CFR, and had Dan Rather, CFR, Leslie Stahl, CFR, and NBC was founded by Robert Sarnoff, who was CFR, and they're journalists like Tom Brokaw and Brian Williams are CFR, and the Sulzbergers over the New York Times, CFR, and they've got all kinds of CFR guys in their ranks over the years, over the decades. Same thing with ABC, Washington Post, and PBS with McNeil Lehrer, all CFR. So when you have this reach of the Council on Foreign Relations into journalism, then you have a false consensus being created. And I talk a little bit in that chapter about the phenomenon of the big lie, that if people hear something often enough, they'll think it's true. So the problem is that you see a news story on AOL if you're on America Online, and then you turn on your CNN and you hear the exact same story, and then you get your Time Magazine and you hear the exact same story. Well, the problem is that Time Warner owns, or at least before the AOL spinoff, owned all three of those organs, and the boss calls the shots. And as you know, and as many of your listeners know, there are just six corporations that control over 90% of the media in the country. Why don't we name them? It's Time Warner, Viacom, Walt Disney, News Corp, CBS, and NBC Universal. So there you go. You've got a virtual monolithic rule over our media. It's almost like the Soviet Union, where the press was state-owned. It's very close to that, and that's why the alternative media like yours is so important, because we're not Operation Mockingbird. We're not paid by the CIA, and we're not in it to make a buck and to get wealthy by lying for the establishment. We're only here to establish the truth, and that's what motivates us.
Yeah, it does. And the truth is all that matters, because at the end of the day, I'm going to get old and I'm going to pass away from this earth, and truth has to be the sole motivator, because without truth, we are going to be living on a planet run amok, a planet run by demons for the sake of demons. And I know that sounds heavy, and for those to whom this information is new, sorry, but facts are facts. And if you don't understand these facts, you need to get a copy of Truth as a Lonely Warrior, Unmasking the Forces Behind Global Destruction. Because, again, just to get a little bit biblical on you here on purpose, I'm going to cite Luke chapter 21, verse 26. Men will faint from fear from what is coming on the earth. The heavens will be shaken. It just seems we're headed that way, James, and I think we're headed that way on purpose. We're being brought to some sort of biblical revelation by these forces that have worked for so long, for so many centuries, to shape the world in their own satanic view. And it's just a nightmare. It's just a living nightmare, isn't it?
They've made it that way. It's really too bad, too, because with the advances that have been made in technology, life could be very good. Not to say that it isn't in a number of ways still, but a lot of the destruction, a lot of the illness we have, the autism, which I have no doubt. I'm a registered nurse myself, by the way. I have no doubt that autism is caused by vaccines, as well as many other autoimmune disorders. And you look at weather control, it could be used for good. It could be used to steer a hurricane away from a city, and instead of intensifying the hurricane or tornado. The technology we have in the computer world is absolutely amazing. Good things could be transmitted. I don't know how old you are, but when I was a kid, they had what they call the golden age of television. And actually, back then, everything was positive. It was family oriented. There was no swearing, no sex. But what didn't bore us. I mean, but it was all family entertainment. And of course, the reason for that was they wanted to get televisions into homes because if they had, gross sex and violence and cursing and shows called Lucifer, like they do now on Fox,
Right.
nobody would have bought a TV back then. So the golden age of television was actually part of their whole agenda to get the TVs in the home. Then they boiled the frog and gradually changed the content. But actually, it's interesting. At that time, television had a positive effect on America, I believe, because it was all about family values. You know, father knows best and leave it to Beaver. Maybe
Yeah.
that sounds corny now,
No, no,
but
no, absolutely.
it was teaching honesty and family values. And I think America was society reflected that in the 1950s. And so what I'm trying to say is that technology can be used. It could be used right now to create a very positive world. It could be very good.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to tell you a little story about Leave It to Beaver. When I was a boy, a little boy, my parents each got divorced a couple of times, and I moved around a lot as a kid. And it was pretty traumatic. And my mom being a working mom at one time in our lives when she was a single mom, in the mornings before I would go off to school, I would watch reruns in black and white of Leave It to Beaver, and I loved that show. And there was such a moral code and a moral compass to those stories, even though they were small, maybe a little trite by today's standards. It was showing a nuclear family, a God-fearing family that lived by a moral code, and I loved Leave It to Beaver. I grew up on reruns of Flipper. I grew up on, even the Brady Bunch. There was always, sure, the stories were ridiculously quaint and very small, but there wasn't this satanic overtone, which is so overt in today's programming, even Disney programming for children. It's just
Right.
insanity to me that it's now so in the open. This Illuminati revealing of the satanic agenda is now in the open, and they are programming our children to accept it through TV and movies.
Right, and you just look at the Super Bowl halftime shows with the one that really gets me is Madonna dressing up as Beth, and some people say that when Katy Perry wrote I don't watch those by the way, but I've seen clips about them. Uh, Katy Perry writing on a beast. Some people say she was playing the Whore of Babylon, which is talked about the in the Book of Revelation, the Whore of Babylon, writing on a red beast, and of course the beast Katy Perry wrote on had red eyes. Just a lot of open Satanism. Again, as we were saying, this show called Lucifer. I believe there's another one called Fallen Angel. And again, I don't watch these, but I heard they even have a feature called Ask the Devil, almost like, Ask the Devil if you've got a question about life, as part of the promo for that show, Lucifer, where he's portrayed as the good guy. And you can't just look at this and say this is just for purely entertainment value. You can see that we are being moved into that time frame where they actually want uh, the beast to be worshipped. That's what the Bible's. I actually liken it to Orwell's 1984, where at the end he'd been brainwashed to the point that he loved Big Brother. I think that there's direct correlation between those.
Yeah, I agree with you. And just real quickly, the name of the movie escapes me, but just a couple of years back, there was a movie that came out in which part of the marketing effort was to get people, teenagers presumably, to go online and sign a document pledging their soul to Satan in exchange for free tickets. Fact. I'll put the news item up on the screen here because, again, the name of the movie escapes me. Yeah, it's a slippery slope into the abyss. And, guys, if you want to wake up your friends and your family to the truth about what's going on in our world, please do get a copy of Truth is a Lonely Warrior, Unmasking the Forces Behind Global Destruction. James, can you tell people how to get the book, maybe even directly from you? Tell people about your website.
My website is jamesperloff.com. It's P as in Peter, ERLOFF. And you'll find a lot of blog posts on there. I go into a lot of depth about things that I maybe only cover in some detail in my book. For example, I have a full-length article on the Vietnam War, on the Korean War. I even have an article on the Battle of Lexington, 1775, as a false flag. I think I'm the only person who's vetted it that way. I actually grew up in Lexington, so it's always been a special area of interest. But I should mention one other thing too, Sean, which is I wrote a script for a movie. We've been talking about movies, and you mentioned Oklahoma City. Probably the best movie about Oklahoma City is A Noble Lie by Free Mind Films. I actually wrote the script for their last documentary, which came out last year. It's called Shattering, and it's mentioned by Kevin. It's narrated by Kevin Sorbo, who I think you know, a
Yeah.
Hollywood actor. He starred in God's Not Dead, and he used to play Hercules on television. But it's a primer like Truth is a Lonely Warrior, but we don't have enough time to go into everything. We don't touch on Zionism or go into any depth on 9/11. We talk about false flags, the Fed, the CFR, and media control. That's about all the time we had for it. But we have a lot of alternative media people in it. People like Joyce Riley, Ben Swan, Catherine Albrecht. I know you know Pastor Chuck Baldwin. He's in it. Patrick Wood and Adam Kokesh, Jerry Griffin, and quite a few people from the Truth Movement, the alternative media, are in that film. And it's if you're looking for something audio visual to give people, that's something you can find out more about. I have a trailer on my website welcome page you can click and play, but the place to buy that movie is on the Free Mind Films website, freemindfilms.com. But again, my website is jamesperloff.com. You can go over there for more information about my books or to read individual blog posts about current events in history.
Oh, great. And I'll back you up. A Noble Lie is a tremendous documentary if you want to learn more about what happened that day in Oklahoma City. Our guest has been James Perloff. Truth is a Lonely Warrior is the book. And the other books, James, if you don't mind, I sure would love to get you back on sometime to talk about Tornado in a Junkyard. I need to talk to you about that.
That's a good one because evolution has actually been the primary intellectual molder of opinion of atheism. It's been what atheists have, not to say anything against atheists personally, but it's been the prime justification for not believing in God. And actually, Darwin's theory is a house of cards, the whole idea that something as complex as a cell could come about by chance. So I'd love to do a show with you on that. And we won't do it from a religious perspective. We'll do it from a straight science perspective, why the theory of evolution is bogus.
Yeah, I really would appreciate that. And as you know, Huxley backed Darwin, and I listened to a gripping interview. Guys, if you want to get a little primer on this Tornado in a Junkyard, listen to the interview that Bill McNally did with James Perloff about Tornado in a Junkyard. It is so gripping. It's so important that you understand how these stories, these manufactured pieces of nonsense are being used against people because, and I'm going to quote James here from that interview, quote, "A lot of people don't want to be accountable to God. So when a theory comes along that explains life without God, they're very quick to accept that," end quote. And I'll leave it right there because if it were up to me, we'd talk for another hour, James. James, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me on. You've got a terrific website. It really keeps people up to date on what's going on. You have a well-deserved following, and you're totally devoted to getting the truth across. So thank you very much, son.
Oh, thank you. It's just been my great honor and distinct pleasure to have you on. Truth is a Lonely Warrior is the book, guys. Support James. Go buy a copy of the book. Buy 10 copies. Give them to your friends and family. You really, truly will wake up people with this book. And thank you for your support at sgtreport.com. We couldn't do it without your support. We wouldn't do it without your support because otherwise we'd just be, we'd be whispering from the mountaintops and nobody would hear us. And thanks for your support at thelibertymill.com. Real news 24/7. God bless.